and welcome to The Kink Perspective. My name's Chris. I'm a psychotherapist and consultant. First, I want to say thank you to all the new listeners that are starting to chime into the show. People from around the world that are really starting to take notice. Some of the questions I'm starting to get sent to me about certain things, which has kind of inspired today's show. So with that being said, I really want you to like, subscribe, follow along, tell some people about the show, introduce them to it, maybe share an episode or two so it can keep growing this platform and keep supplying some of this information to you all and really kind of keep helping and giving back to the communities. So don't forget, if you're listening to me on Spotify, click the like, subscribe, rate me 5 stars so I can keep the show free for now. Would really appreciate that. Really keeps me able to keep doing what I'm doing for you all. Now, today, what I wanted to talk about was navigating your first dungeon experience, and not only dealing with that, but some of the common problems that we might face if we have a little bit of anxiety, and some of the different types of anxiety we might have along the way, or some of the things that we're already currently facing. This topic was sent to me by somebody in Europe that's been kind of facing this, and they're kind of getting into their new scenes. They didn't mind mentioning, so I'm just going to kind of do the country, not the city, but some of the new things that they're experiencing in the Austrian scene. So I found it really quite fascinating as I'm learning more and more about the European scenes. And one of these days I'm going to be over there, guys, so I really look forward to getting into some more scenes on that part of the world. So today I want to kind of just start going through first some of the common anxieties people may encounter before they head off to a dungeon. I want to kind of, break down some of these anxieties that people face, talk about some etiquettes along the way. I think dungeon etiquette is really important, especially if you're new, and then, kind of go from there. So first thing I want to kind of cover today that's a really common anxiety issue is the whole fear of the unknown. Now, this is a really common psychological response to new situations. This anxiety kind of stems from uncertainty and lack of familiarity with a new environment, people, or unexpected or even expected behaviors. The brain kind of perceives this as an unfamiliar situation with potential threats, and this can actually even trigger some of our stress responses. Because we don't know what we're getting into, what ends up happening is our mind races, and we're not really certain. We may have never been to a place. We're not really sure what it's going to look like, or smell, or any of these things that we're going to encounter along the way, or things we're going to see. So kind of that anxiety insides of us builds. So when it comes to visiting a dungeon for the first time, this fear is really amplified by this whole unique nature of the environment. Remember, there's going to be new things you're going to see, new sounds you're going to hear. The activities are going to be very overwhelming and possibly even overstimulating. So to combat this a little bit, newcomers really should research dungeon dynamics that they're going to attend. Maybe read firsthand accounts from people who've been there, take a look at some of their reviews or some of the things that they put on. Maybe attend a virtual tour if they have something, or if they have a video of their dungeon, take a look. What this does, it gives you a chance to kind of familiarize yourself with some of the common practices, maybe some of the rules if they have them listed on their website. And what this does is reduces our anxiety significantly, because what we're doing here is we're breaking down what we don't know and getting a little bit of a picture and understanding of what we may or may not even encounter. Now, there are some of us that do struggle with social anxiety, for example. Now, this kind of involves a fear of social situations where someone might be judged or feel like they might be scrutinized by other people. This can, a lot of people kind of encounter this, especially I read a lot about this going to munches or their first time to a dungeon. And this type of anxiety can lead to really intense nervousness. We might become self-conscious, or we might even avoid some social interactions. We might stay at the back of the room, or we might be at the back of the munch, or we go to a dungeon, we might be in the back corners, just kind of watching. And people may not know we're struggling with this. Now, in a dungeon situation, this social anxiety might manifest as a fear of interaction, or especially with more experienced people, and we might be concerned about not fitting in. And one thing to kind of maybe keep in mind here is we were all new once. We all stepped foot into a dungeon once. We've all kind of felt this nervousness. So, to mitigate this, it's really helpful to remember that dungeons are genuinely inclusive and non judgmental spaces. Maybe arriving with a friend or a mentor or participating in pre event gatherings can really provide a sense of comfort for you and familiarity that kind of eases the transition into the community. Now, obviously, this is not a one size fits all kind of response here, but what you can do is, again, start maybe getting to know some of the people who attend local community gatherings, or potentially, some of the people who are going to be attending some of the dungeon parties. And that way you allow yourself a little bit of familiarity with some of the people you might encounter later on. This again helps you reduce some of these stress levels, so you're not feeling or walking in anxious, or maybe your palms are a little less sweaty, or you're not clenching your fists as much. So again, some little bit of tips there for you. The next thing I want to kind of go into here today is about performance anxiety. Now, this fear kind of involves one's ability to perform a task, and this is really often due to concerns about being, again, evaluated and judged by others or even a group of our peers. This creates a lot of self-doubt, and it can even manifest physical symptoms like sweating, shaking, or shortness of breath. And if we think about how this might apply into a dungeon type of setting, when we first go into a dungeon, we might be a little bit concerned about how we're going to perform in a scene, whether or not we're going to meet the expectations of others. Now, what's important about this is we are putting on a demonstration, or we're doing a scene, and what we have to keep in mind is we're doing this scene for ourselves and our partners, or at least the other person that we're involved with. Most people don't go to a dungeon or put on a scene, and I'm talking about people outside of demonstrators. We're not really doing that for anybody else. We're really doing it for ourselves. So it's important to remember here that the dungeons are a place of learning and a place for you to explore. Now, I don't expect anybody coming into the lifestyle, and I don't really think anybody does, that's brand new. I'm not expecting you to be at the level of an expert as far as doing some more complicated scenes. And no one's really going to judge you for that. It might even help you. I know there are people that don't like to have a lot of conversations with people, and unfortunately, there's not much you can control about that, because you can't expect everybody to want to talk to you. But maybe pre-communications with somebody that goes to the dungeon often, and tell them that it's your first time, you're thinking about doing a scene, maybe if they have any tips for you, right? If you're communicating openly with people, especially about your experience, and you're focusing on solely the enjoyment of the experience rather than the performance, this can help you kind of lessen that anxiety tremendously. And that's really kind of what it's all about, because we want to remember we're doing these activities, we're getting involved in these scenes because we enjoy them, and we want to we're sharing that love and that joy with others. Now, this one's a little bit more. This is, I think, more of a common type of anxiety, and this kind of revolves around safety. And safety really becomes a concern when it triggers anxiety due to the fear of a physical or an emotional harm. Now, what we want to keep in mind is that those of us in the lifestyle enjoy hurt. We either enjoy being hurt or, inflicting hurt upon others. Now, that's obviously not for everybody, but for a good majority. Even if you like a spanking, you're liking some form of hurt. What we never want to do is harm somebody. So that anxiety of being, worrying we're going to physically or emotionally harm somebody, it's quite natural, and it's a protective response. And it ensures individuals take the necessary precautions and potentially risky situations which we are trying to mitigate the amount of harm that may happen. You're not going to be prepared for every situation, so if you learn to give yourself a little bit of a break, but if you're doing rope for the first time on your own, that you got your shears ready to go in case of something happens, or that your ties are secure, you're double checking certain things. You're doing as much as to be expected of you in a given scene so you feel a little bit safer. And if you think about how do we apply this into the dungeon setting, well, we already know that inside of a dungeon setting, that safety is always going to be the paramount concern for everybody who attends. So understanding the safety protocols of the dungeon will greatly help you reduce any anxiety you have. So this is also going to be knowing if you have safe words with your partner, know them. If you understand the rules of what the dungeon monitors, if they have them, what their roles are inside of the dungeon. And, going as far as being aware of first aid procedures. If they have an orientation setting or workshops on safety practices that they conduct inside of their dungeon, maybe going to them so you can get a little bit more familiar. All of these things are going to provide reassurance for you. Now, knowing that everyone in the dungeon is equally committed to a safe environment helps us build trust, and it helps us reduce our anxiety. Now, this next one here is quite a common anxiety, and this comes from judgment and stigma. And these arise from a fear of being negatively judged by others, which does lead to feelings of shame or sometimes even inadequacy. Inadequacy. This often is exacerbated here in environments that are outside of our societal norms. So when we're new and we're doing something we haven't done in a public setting, that might be common if you're not feeling overly confident that you're wearing the right thing or somebody is going to judge what you are wearing. Concerns about being judged for one's kinks or sexual preferences is really common among those that are new to the dungeon scene. Now, dungeons, though, are typically accepting spaces that prioritize our consent and non-judgment. And remembering that everyone in the dungeon is there for the same reasons and that judgment is contrary to the community's ethos can be comforting. I know sometimes people are still people and they can't, they might pass some internal judgment, but most often when I see somebody wearing an outfit that I think is amazing, I want to let them know that I think that outfit is amazing, or it's really shiny latex, or it's beautiful leather, or whatever the case, maybe it's a costume. I want to make sure that my compliment is genuine. And more often than not, for me, it is very genuine. If it's something intriguing, I want to let them know I think that their work at their craft is just, extraordinary. And when we hear something like that, it makes us feel good. I'm not telling you to go out of your way to compliment somebody, but if you find something quite moving, let somebody know. Now, I will get to the part here in a little bit about not interrupting a scene, so you definitely don't want to give somebody a compliment right in the middle of a scene. We'll cover that here in a little bit. But if you remember, engaging in positive self-talk and, getting some community members that support you in your endeavors really helps you reduce this anxiety type. And all of these things kind of intermix when we are starting to, get into the realm of dungeon etiquette. I remember the first dungeon that I ever went to, which unfortunately is now closed down, but I started my journey a very, very long time ago at 1763 in Atlanta. It was a beautiful dungeon. Didn't know at the time it was even that close to my home. And they were some of the most warm and caring and receptive people I'd ever met. Non-judgmental. I remember going in there when I was young. People were warm and welcoming and inviting. No one talked down to me. I remember people checking on me because I remember the first time I walked in there, there was so much happening on this particular day. It was quite a big overload for me. So I remember how I had to pace myself. And I remember going home that night and talking to my mentor about my first experience there. So when I went there, the first thing was I really started to become a touch more versed on consent and communication. Now, I talk about consent a lot. People in the lifestyle talk about consent a lot. We talk about how it's a cornerstone of BDSM activity. And at this point, I really think people do understand that how consent is clear and informed and enthusiastic agreement between people. I don't want to browbeat that anymore. If you're new, you really need to spend time understanding consent beyond what you've known and maybe in the vanilla world. But if you've had some time in the lifestyle, you're going to understand how important and paramount consent is, especially when we're talking about things like effective communication and respecting people's boundaries and their limits. When we look at these things, especially in a dungeon setting, we should always be discussing the limitations with our partners. This probably should have gone on, should have happened prior to getting involved or setting up a scene. You should be establishing your safe words prior to doing a scene, and your expectations once, before the scene happens, on the scene setup, and prior to maybe the scene kicking off, maybe one last time covering them over. It's not completely necessary, but I think it's really, if you're still new and you're still kind of nervous, going over these things one last time, there's not going to be anything wrong. And I think your partner is going to be much happier and willing to engage in this scene if you're covering these things a little bit more in depth. And this not only ensures a safe and enjoyable experience for the two of you, but it really does bolster and foster trust and that mutual respect as we're starting to get involved with somebody. Now, regular check-ins during a scene to confirm how they're feeling or that the consent is still there is really crucial. I'm not talking about trying to pull somebody out of subspace or stop somebody from their dominant perspective if they're in the midst of a scene. But, if there is some ongoing communication, if you've negotiated that, what you're going to talk about. And definitely respecting when someone says, stop or no, without pressuring them to change their mind is a really fundamental aspect and good dungeon etiquette. It's something we should know as adults, but it's definitely worth a reminder. Now, this is kind of a big one for me when we're talking about dungeon etiquette, and that's respecting privacy. And that means acknowledging the right of the individuals to maintain the confidentiality regarding their personal lives and their activities, right? If I recognize John, who's my, lawyer, that it's at the dungeon, I shouldn't be talking about his activities outside. What he does there is on him, and that's not for me to be bringing up outside. And we do these activities because we enjoy them, and obviously they're outside of the societal norm, but we don't necessarily, not every person is comfortable discussing these things outside of these activities, and we have to be able to respect that. So this really does involve not disclosing any personal information. If we see somebody, maybe we can just wave to them and acknowledge them and then move on. But we're not going to say, oh, God, John, I haven't seen you since, we had that meeting of my will. I appreciate you doing the big write-up for me, because I didn't gain his consent to start talking about, even though it's my matters and the things that I hired him to do. Maybe nobody knows he's a lawyer. So probably not the best thing to do. And a lot of dungeons here are going to have really strict rules about photography and sharing personal details. If a dungeon's probably going to have photos being taken, I think everybody's going to they're going to sign disclaimers or have paperwork, or at least if they don't want to opt into them, they're going to have their faces blurred out. And also, if we do know, again, talking about somebody's participation outside the dungeon, if we saw somebody and they were doing something, maybe they don't want to talk about it outside of the dungeon setting. And that's perfectly fine. You have to respect people's privacy, because this fosters this whole environment of being safe and enjoyable, where people get this chance to feel free to express themselves and their desires and their sexuality without any fear of exposure. Anonymity here is highly valued, and breaching it does lead to a significant loss of trust and issues with inside of the community context. So this next one kind of covers some apparel. And we've got dress codes and appearances. I kind of like this as a dungeon etiquette rule, because for me, attending high protocol events really is something that I quite enjoy. Some, suits and ties or dresses. It really brings another next level to things. And of course, that's not for everybody. But I want to kind of cover a little bit of these etiquette details and their dungeon application. So, dress codes and dungeons here help maintain the atmosphere, and they kind of ensure that everyone feels comfortable and respected. Now, these types of rules can vary widely depending on the venue, the event, the location in the world, cultural norms, or, their how they perceive they want, everybody being in the dungeon. Some dungeons might allow people to run around or be completely nude. Others might say, nope, you have to wear a certain thing, and that's okay. That's what they want, or that's what they allow. You need to adhere to it. Now, adhering to some sort of dress code demonstrates the respect for the space and the community as a whole. If the dungeon wants you to wear fetish attire or something specific, you have to comply. And that's their rules. You're not going to get a chance to kind of really judge against that. You want to attend a fairy lingerie event with bubbles, and everybody's required to wear some sort of piece of lingerie. Well, if that's the required piece that you have to wear, you don't feel comfortable wearing it, but you really want to go, that's probably not going to be fair to the other attendees that you somehow got a pass and they're doing this. So maybe you're going to make them feel uncomfortable. So you need to be very well aware of what the dungeon rules are. This not only helps you kind of blend in, but it also shows that you respect the norms of the environment. And if you're unsure about what to wear, maybe reach out to organizers or the dungeon masters for kind of guidance, because this becomes always a good idea, and it lets them know that you're really taking a keen interest in your local community. So what about interaction and behavior? Now, polite and respectful interaction is always crucial in any type of setting that we have, but it really is more so in a dungeon where boundaries and consent we already know are completely paramount. Now, this involves permission before engaging in conversation or even joining scenes. Now, if you notice somebody is involved in a scene, don't walk up to them. And I'm not going to say that to kind of browbeat people, but they're in the middle of something and you don't want to really interrupt them. You want to let them do their thing. Maybe if people are watching something, you don't want to interrupt them because they're maybe trying to learn something new. Wait till the scene is over. Maybe introduce yourself politely and ask what they thought of the scene, or explain that you're new and that you just sat down to watch this and it was, you're talking a little bit, but always make sure that you're talking and listening at the same time. Now, in a dungeon application here, you always want to ask permission if you maybe see somebody that's also, they have a space for people who are selling some stuff, or they're laying out their tools for a scene. You don't want to just walk over and pick up somebody's property. You always want to ask permission before touching someone else's equipment or them personally. Some people don't like to be touched. You need to respect that boundary. Now, even if you're just curious, remember that unsolicited contact can be more than very unwelcome. It can sometimes get you removed from a dungeon. Phrasing questions politely and being ready to accept no really gracefully is a key here. Respect is a foundation of a healthy dungeon environment, and observing these courtesies helps maintain it. When you go to a dungeon, you're part of a community. They don't revolve around you. Everybody is kind of working in a cohesive manner together and respecting and enjoying each other's space. Now, cleanliness and aftercare. Now, maintaining cleanliness should be not understated, especially in a shared space. If we go to the gym, we're asked to wipe down the equipment, should do the same. And it is essential for health and safety. Aftercare, we know, kind of tends to the physical and emotional needs for those involved in a scene. But if you're not in a scene and somebody else is, setting up for their aftercare, maybe don't disturb them. Coming down can have different consequences for different people. So if it's not your scene or not your sub, or unless somebody asks you to be involved with their aftercare, probably don't offer. Now, when it comes to equipment, always clean your equipment before you use it and after you use it. And this helps prevent the spread of any infections, and it shows respect not only for the dungeon or the organizers, but for somebody who may use it next after you. Now, if you are conducting aftercare, you've done a scene, you're going to conduct aftercare for your submissive or you need aftercare, it's really this whole period of recovery. There's some in reflection following the scene. You might need some water, some warmth, like a blanket, or just someone to listen. And understanding and participating in aftercare really does create a supportive environment, kind of helps us manage the emotional highs and lows of the scenes. And it's also important to know that not everybody needs aftercare, but all of these things need to be negotiated prior to your scene. But again, if you're just watching someone come down, you've just finished a scene, you may not want to interrupt. Give them a few minutes. Maybe a good rule of thumb is about 10 minutes before any interaction, right? They might be coming down from the scene, might be intense. So set yourself like a mental clock, walk around, check out something else. Now, this can't be understated. Listening to dungeon monitors. Now, dungeon monitors are responsible for ensuring that the safety and rules of everybody at the dungeon are completely upheld. They have authority to intervene if they observe anything that's unsafe or violates consent or any rules of the dungeon. And paying attention to and respecting the instructions of DMs is very critical. They're there to help maintain the environment for everybody, not just you or not just others. If you are approached by a DM, listen to them carefully, follow their guidance, and don't argue with them, right? They're there for a reason. And their role is to support a consensual space and to respect everybody's autonomy and create an environment that's safe. And having them contributes to the overall safety and harmony of the dungeon. Now, I want to give you a few kind of tips for a positive first experience. First, do some research. Take a look at where you're going, what you're going to do. Learn as much as you can about the dungeon, its rules, the type of activities you might see. This helps set realistic expectations and really does reduce the fear of the unknown. Maybe, again, like I mentioned this before, attend an orientation session. Some dungeons, maybe once a month, maybe more than that, offer newcomers orientations and explain the rules beforehand, the etiquette, the dress wear. All these sessions are invaluable for easing anxiety and alleviates a lot of the pressure you might have. If you're going to go to a dungeon for the first time and you're not comfortable with it, I was super nervous the first time I ever went. I went alone. I didn't know anybody. But my experience was nothing but positive. I love the Atlanta community. But maybe you want to ask a friend to go with you that's in the community, or, you're working with a mentor and you might want to ask them to go. Having someone familiar with the environment can provide a lot of support, a lot of guidance, and it does make the experience a little less intimidating. This is a really good point. Start slow. Observe before participating. This allows you to acclimate to the environment at your own pace, so you don't feel rushed. Go slow. This is a marathon. It's not a sprint. And lastly, be really kind towards yourself and definitely be kind towards others. Understand that it's okay to be nervous and that making mistakes is part of learning. And if you make a mistake, apologize. But treat yourself and others with compassion and respect when you're inside of a dungeon. It's really important. And if you suffer from some sort of type of anxiety I listed or the many others that are out there, kind of heed these rules. They kind of really do help reduce the stresses we face and problems that may arise. Still, when I go to new dungeons, because I've never been there, if I haven't had time to look into them or what they expect to kind of go in my formal attire, I'm very respectful, but I'm still quite nervous because, I don't know the layout. I don't know who's going to be there. I don't know what scenes might go on that day. So yeah, sometimes it can be a lot to take in. But if I'm going to stress anything from today's show is really learn some of the etiquettes. Right? Really learn about some of these points that I'm talking about. Listening to the dungeon monitors, the cleanliness, the interactions in your behaviors, dress codes, respecting autonomy and privacy, and definitely about consent and communication. The really big parts here to how, this is another level of how our community interacts. Not all of BDSM transpires on online interactions. A lot more of it is done in some sort of real life. Now, I realize a lot of people don't go to dungeons, and that's okay. I'm not saying you should have to. I think it's a great learning experience inside of your BDSM journey, but it's not necessary. I don't look down on people who don't go to dungeons because there's a myriad of reasons we can't afford. Some of us can't afford to. I know some dungeons are quite expensive, but they are. It's such an invaluable experience. It's fun. It's a new environment. It's quite immersive. I mean, you see so many different things going on. So, if you have any questions about this and you want to reach out, send me an email at thekinkperspective@gmail.com. I'll take a look. I'll address them. I can, follow up with you if you're curious. But I'd like to hear back from any of you. I'm going to post this. Is what was your first experience inside of a dungeon? What was that like for you? I think it's a really key point to kind of reflect on not only how far we've come in our journeys, what it might be like for some new people. It might be a good way to also help some people that are coming into the community if we talk about this more. And so they get a little bit of an understanding, because this community can be overwhelming and very daunting at times. It's kind of why I kind of try to normalize this a little bit more. But I really want to thank this person for this question. I really hadn't thought about like kind of anxieties and how, first time going into dungeons really coincides. But I really think that it's a good discussion today. And I thank her for reaching out to me. I hope your upcoming dungeon experience this weekend is going to be incredible. I hope you have fun, and I want you to have fun. And, go at your own pace. Remember, you don't have to do anything you're not comfortable doing. Maybe just sit around and watch for the first time. If you want to participate, set your boundaries, set your limits. Set them with yourself first, and then set them with the person that you're involved in. Right? And if you're wondering who I'm talking to the person who sent me this email, because I know they're a little bit nervous about their event coming up. But hopefully, by covering some of this for you today, this kind of alleviates some of this pressure for you. And you get a chance here to enjoy yourself. Focus more on what you're going to do and not so much the things maybe are going to bother you. You're going to have all that other time to think about all that stuff. But I promise you, once you're there, it's such an incredible experience. And it's so much fun to do. And the place you're going and the event that's going on, it sounds so fun. And I had a chance to look into it, and it just sounds like a blast. So definitely try to, enjoy yourself, focus on it, have some fun, and go from there. But yeah, so that's going to be the question today. What was everybody's first experience like? What do you remember walking into a dungeon? How did that make you feel? Did you take it all in? Did you jump right in? Love to learn more. Again, I want to reiterate, my book's now out in print version, or you can purchase it through ebooks, wherever you get your ebooks from. I know I've been asked about that for a while. So that's available for you. I have now dropped that I'm doing another podcast that's out there now. It's coming. The official date for release is June 14th will be the first episode. The new podcast is called BDSM, Blood, Death, Sex, and Murder, a true crime podcast. We'll be covering the fascinating world of crime and BDSM and how they intertwine, and some of the social media that these interactions have happened and transpired on. Some of the crimes you might know about, some of them you may never have heard about. But we are going to deep dive in together on that podcast. If you want to start getting ready to listen, I'm up on Twitter for that one and on Instagram if you want to start following me there for constant updates. Building out the first few cases now. I've got cases from all over the world, and we're going to take a look at each one as we go through that one together. I want to again thank you all of my new listeners. Your questions are just so wonderful. I can't get to them today, but keep them coming in. They inspire me for new shows, and really, gives me a chance an opportunity to think about some of the things that different perspective and different cultures and even different places in the world face when entering the lifestyle. But just remember, be kind to yourself, have some fun, and enjoy the experience. And if you're comfortable and you want to let me know how your experience went next week. and tell me all about it. Until next time, everybody, be safe, stay tuned.